wherever you are around the world. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you to give this presentation. It's a delight to see some familiar names, some of whom I've known a long time, and I look forward to connecting with new names that I don't know yet. Very pleased to see the community to pick up on especially the traceability declaration, and obviously now beyond that more broadly too. So with no further introductions, I'll get into the presentation. Obviously, well, not obviously, but our starting point is aiming to support the seafood sector to treat people better on board fishing vessels. Fishing vessels are our focus and our priority, although we do have capability in aquaculture as well. Treating people better on board fishing vessels matters to civil society, to the supply chain, and to governments, and fortunately the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission, Regional Fisheries Management Organisation, Fortuna, has a resolution in this space, the only RFMO currently with such a resolution. It also results in these other attributes. Caring for people on board fishing vessels can help you understand your risk profile as a company. Treating people better can result in treating the fish better, treating bycatch in the marine environment better, improved crew performance and morale, efficiency, improved efficiency in operations, reduced compliance costs, and improved product and quality and increased profitability. And in OSA International, we have the capability to financially model that social and environmental return on investments as well. So who and what is OSA? OSA is a new not-for-profit enterprise established last month to address the abuse of workers on board fishing vessels and in aquaculture operations worldwide, with a focus on enabling seafood companies to develop and implement effective social accountability management systems. Our vision is that all fishing vessel operations are free from human rights abuses. It's a bold ambition, but there's no point starting out in a space like this unless you have a bold ambition. And it really has been the confluence of a number of flows, a number of people coming together. Tony and I, bottom left there, my business partner in Terra Moana, and Karen on the bottom on my right, might be left in your presentation, but we're the team in Terra Moana, and I was invited by Austral Fisheries to advise them in 2016 of how they could address these issues. They had been red flagged by the Seafood Watch program at that point as a significant risk because of their toothfish operations using Indonesian crew in the sub-Antarctic. And I said, actually, yes, I do know someone that could help us. And we set up a project with Marcelo. Marcelo is a leading advisor and expert in this space on a range of committees and workforces, task forces internationally. And we did 2 projects, which I'll describe later on. As part of the evolution here, we also ran some capability building last year, and that meant that John Lafiti was able to join from Fiji, where he was based, and New Zealand Foreign Affairs sponsored that, which attracted the attention of Transform, which many of you may know as a major founder of the parties to the Nauru Agreement and the Pacific Isle relationships. Transform and I have known each other for a very long time, and he expressed interest. So it's a huge honour to have Transform in our working group, our ropu, as we say in Māori and Te Reo in New Zealand. And Peter and I worked together for many years in WWF, and he and Karen and Marcelo and John are now involved in a project, a prototyping project with the Papua New Guinea Fishing Industry Association. So it's worth spending a little bit of time of how that came together, because it's a really good human story of people that have shared values and common ethics and trust and respect and know each other from a long way back. And as you can see there from the approach, the areas of leadership that we're taking, we all have very good complementary skills and expertise as well. So there's a little bit of that journey that I've just described, but fundamentally, Marcelo created a significant tool. He began back in 2010, 11, and that took some development through the years, and it was fundamentally based on ILO 188, which many of you will be aware of, and then also included the SA 8000 criteria a bit later on. Those were, that tool and the metrics were presented at the Pacific Tuna Forum in Fiji, where I happened to be as well at that point. Marcelo continued to refine the framework. Further into 2016, again in the work piloting it with Austral, which was a multi-gear fleet, a trawler and several trawlers and longliners, the SA 8000 components were added then. As well as a metrics system, which we clarify a bit further as well. And then subsequently, many other criteria started to need to be added, and the significant turning point in MSC making a decision on how to handle this, the Seafood Watch, Seafood Slavery Risk Tool, and other ethical sourcing requirements. The inclusion of workers' voice is obviously key, which we learned from the Austral assessment. We've got this quantitative ability to gauge improvement now. So the Austral project, Marcelo had been working for some time with Frabel, and the Austral project gave us the ability to take that into the Papua New Guinea Fishing Industry Association with Frabel as the first member there to be trialling the product and tools, and that's underway, still going at the moment, that project. And that then led to us to decide late in 2019 to create OSA, as I said, which has just been formally constituted. And then into the future, we've got, with our strong financial and mathematical skills, the ability to develop, and some IT background, the ability to develop real-time IT-based data collection and comparative analytical system for vessel owners, RFMOs, retail, etc. Oh, and I neglected to mention up here as well that Peter has added an entirely new risk approach to the beginning. So here's the program. I'll obviously pause here to take you through it. But here's tiers 1, 2, and 3 are the risk framework that Peter has done a lot of work on in the last few months. Fundamentally, from a buyer retail perspective, these tier 1 and tier 2 are probably your highest interest. And then when you have a direct relationship with a company and vessels that you're trying to support, perhaps tier 3, which overlaps quite significantly with tier 4. Now, we've already had a first meeting with the Seafood Slavery Risk Tool and also with the Fishwise team, 2 separate meetings. And there's a lot of willingness to share and explore the complementarity in these approaches. But fundamentally, we have the ability to get on board vessels. So the tier 4 is where that really happens. The first visit to the vessels and the company operations is obviously preceded by self-assessment, document preparation, desktop review, etc. of the team. And then there's this gap period, which can be 12 months, 12 to 18 months between on-site visit 1 and on-site visit 2, where there's obviously optional support available to the client should they wish to have extra external advice. I mean, we like to sort of couch ourselves as an internal support team, but clearly the aim of the objective is capability building. So the more of this that companies want to do for themselves, the better. And we recognize that creating management systems takes time. And then, of course, you have to have the on-site visit 2, and then you end up with a gap report of how far they've come, and then annual checks. So this is the Tier 4 benchmark support, assessment, implementation support and verification, the guts of the program, where there's this significant benchmark tool that I mentioned Marcelo has developed. So the OSA risk methodology, just a bit of detail, there are 20 criteria in each tier based on 18 global risk indices, combined with retail and consumer expectations, combined with our knowledge of relationships throughout the supply chain, our knowledge from relationships throughout supply chain, sorry. And each tier can be conducted in isolation or combined in a process to dive more deeper. Clients can obviously tailor that process, the steps that they wish to undertake, and each tier is a cascading reduction in overall risk to the client. There's a metric-based approach for outputs, and you know, the benchmark tool provides the robust assurance, as I mentioned. Risk rating outcome guides further investigation, which obviously enables prioritization for deep dives. The assessment tool, the benchmark assessment tool, is unique. It's unique because it factors all major conventions, standards and criteria, including from NGOs and a range of initiatives. It's in two parts, vessel operations and company management, with a total of 135 criteria, again drawing from the convention standards and other frameworks to list and detail those. And I can tell you, I have edited every single cell. It's a very impressive tool, and obviously over time we hope to be able to automate that if and when we can either draw some value from clients or seek other investment and funding support. And there's the capability to, as I mentioned, to be quantitated as a score and provide the company with a before and after view over the two assessments and demonstrate improvements made in a very succinct manner. And that improvement value can be calculated to assess company bottom line benefits, which, as many of you from the NGO space will recognize as a very valuable approach that my NGO background, I'll say we have been striving for many years. But Tony and Transform, with their in-business expertise, have been doing that kind of analysis. So bringing it together is pretty exciting. So here's what a before and an after looks like. It's just a simple spider diagram, but that calculates from the scores in the assessment tool. And the Austral fisheries example is later on in this presentation, where the indicators are listed and described. So obviously it's a continuous improvement journey that many of you are familiar with, involving second-party audit that we can deliver. The third-party audit is by an external provider if so desired. And we can also help take it into corporate reporting and public disclosure frameworks, connect to the Sustainable Development Goal, UN Global Compact, etc. And it's designed to align with the SA's 8,000 Social Responsibility Management System maturity model, which Austral found very useful in their pilot. Now here's the potential longer term of the information flow in and out to clients, but also more broadly to the sustainable seafood sector as data grows. And we've started talking to some of the other programs, as I mentioned, and being able to share data behind the scenes would improve this. Now that the modalities for how to do that haven't been worked out yet, but there's quite a significant opportunity here for comparative assessment across vessels within a fleet, with companies within an association, associations within a region, region by region, species by species, within a species group, etc. This is a really key one too, to be explicit about, in that OSA is not a certification scheme. It is not consumer facing. We are not focused on audit, although we can audit. It is not competing with these other social condition improvement initiatives and hasn't been designed to do so. And as I said, we're already having very good discussions with a range of these parties. OSA is able and experienced in operating at the company fleet vessel level. My business partner, Tony, has 30 plus years in the seafood industry, for example, and knows the good, the bad, and the ugly of what goes on board fishing boats. And certainly New Zealand was not immune to this problem horrifically a few years ago. That was exposed, which needed to happen. OSA is a social accountability improvement program. And we were talking about social improvement projects on one of the calls the other day, although that hasn't been framed formally yet. And I'm not sure if and when and how it will be. It is holistic, as I mentioned, covering all the major standards, codes of conduct, guidances, etc. And we have a very strong commitment to assessment, empowerment, and capability building. And anyone who's worked with me in my WWF background will recognise that as a core value and approach. We are capable, as I said, of audit, which occurs at Tier 4 in the annual surveillance approach. And we are gaining credibility for complementing the other social condition improvement initiatives. This is a little bit of a test, way too many words for describing, and I'll be providing the presentation for Tom, way too many words for presenting, and I'll be providing the presentation for Tom to make available, of course. I drew this up yesterday and had a little bit of back and forth with Austral about it. Some of you may be aware that David Carter's on the NFI Fish Crew board, and Martin is involved. Martin Extel from Austral is the executive director of CBOS globally. And then Marcelo was also Peter were able to feed into this yesterday. So it's a little bit of a draft, and I would welcome your reflections on it. This point here about all leading global social schemes, that's why they're not all listed. There are a lot of them. But these two major driver resources, for example, this is an example of how the whole thing could work. So yes, as I said, I would explicitly welcome your feedback on this slide, and of course anything else in the presentation. So in the interest of time, I'll go through some of these quite quickly, but again, you'll be able to reflect on it in private subsequently. So we strive to meet businesses' needs. Some of these are for the catching sector, for example, this one here, the third one. Some of them for the buyer, supply chain, retail end of things. And complement and meet these other auditable social components. I should add Seafood Task Force in there as well. And then that the fact that Austral have gone public with their report, which I described later on, there's real brand credibility in possible there in that enabling of transparency. There are a range of other benefits across within business and across the political and communications kind of spectrum, as I mentioned, and the ability to sort of add it all up in an ROI kind of frame as well. Now this is another busy slide, but it's this is a mixture of slides for potential clients as well as to help people understand the program from the outset. So we have this strong commitment to capability building, training, and communications, and these can be delivered remotely and in person. Obviously, with COVID-19, for some time this will be remote, and we're just building the online facilities for that at the moment. But there's ability to deliver for internal quality assurance personnel. Operational human resource skipper crew type programs. We've run a responsible fisheries awareness program with the largest Māori-owned seafood company, Moana New Zealand, that we work with in Te Moana, and then combined with operational management meetings and then communicating internally and externally to these various fora as options. You know more about the details of these than I do, and are busily involved in many of them, I'm sure. We had a very good meeting with TunaCons in the middle of the night last week, and as I said, are working with Frabel in Papua New Guinea Fishing Industry Association at the moment, and Transform's on the board of ISSF. And thank you for the opportunity to present this to you today. This slide will just get busier and busier, but we've been, reaching out individuals and collectively to a range of these organisations, and that will only grow over time as awareness grows. And I know, when I know who each of you are from, I'll be able to tick off a few of those that you now have been introduced to OSA as well. So why OSA and tuna particularly? Because working on tuna sustainability is so exciting and so important, and so much progress has been made, but obviously there's still a lot to do. And it is very refreshing, as someone who's been involved in sustainable seafood since 1999, a few years now, that the sustainable seafood movement has made terrific advances. Clearly not enough for the health of the oceans, especially in a time of evident climate change and social human disruption. So it is very humbling and a relief that finally the attention has strongly turned to the human component. The team at OSA know the tuna sector very well. Marcelo, Transform, Peter, John and I have all worked in great depth and detail with the tuna sector. I neglected to mention that John was the executive officer of the Pacific Island Tuna Industry Association before joining OSA with us recently. I've also mentioned that WCPFC has an explicit resolution in this space. Many tuna fisheries are MSC certified, with now the requirement that they address these issues as well. As I said, the issues are fundamentally important. And there should be another bullet point down there that says the market is driving for this, and the market from an OSA perspective is significant. There are many companies, fleets and vessels. So I mentioned it's been trialled in practice. There's a lovely quote there from David Kindly, the CEO of Austral. And now I've mentioned we're working with Frabel as well, and fortunately Franny is also the chair of the World Tuna Purse Seine Organisation. And remarkably, late last week, after a number of rounds of communication and good intent from Austral, they put their whole second report online. It's a phenomenal step that they've taken. It is so brave and made me very proud as a long-term advocate, but I also edited every darn word in that report. So any typos, I accept responsibility, but more importantly, these two these two spider diagrams show the significant improvements that they made. And really, gosh, when you see in the middle there that they have developed 70 policies and procedures in the interim, and they put all of their workers onto at least the living wage of their home country. I mean, that's made a tangible difference to people's lives. Typo in the middle there, apologies, training, missing an I, and capability building of key personnel was undertaken in several ways. Marcelo did on-site training in Mauritius of company staff that came across from Perth, and personnel and management operational staff based there, as well as Leslie attending one of our training courses, which we ran on ISO 19011:18 in Melbourne in November last year. And this has significantly increased their company transparency in this space. The first and the only company so far to have done this. So there's the link. You'll be able to dive in and see it yourselves. It's linked on the bottom of the front page at the moment if your fingers are wandering as I speak. So here's the team in Papua New Guinea on board a tuna vessel, and we're delighted that Karen has expressed interest from our team in diving in and learning detail here. So that's direct capability building from Tira Moana to support her to do that as well. And she's got a very subtle and unique way of communicating with especially non-native English speakers, which is very valuable in this space, as you'll appreciate. So the available training we offer is obviously an introduction to the program and the social improvement context, who's who in the zoo, you know, what all the different criteria are and how they work. That's pretty much probably a half day exercise that we haven't run yet, but can deliver, and that's a taster to these others which are more in depth. ISO 1911-18 can be done in 3 to 4 days, and the SA 8000 we've been in touch with them. They delivered a 5-day program in Wellington in October last year. Which is the one John Mufiti attended, funded by New Zealand Foreign Affairs. And we've been in touch with them more recently about how we might collaborate into the future in this space. But yes, the online access is in development, which needed to be anyway, but obviously significantly charged with the COVID-19 situation. And there you go, to keep it succinct, and contact details at the end. So welcome your thoughts on collaboration opportunities with GTA, and I'll leave the slides there so that we can go back to them if we need to. All right, Tom?
Great, thank you very much, Catherine, particularly as I know it's incredibly early or very, very late for you where you're based. Brilliant. Well, thank you. Would love to open it up to questions. If anyone has any questions or comments or feedback for Catherine, that would be great. Feel free to just shout out, or if you'd prefer to use the group chat function, then you're very welcome to.
Hello, it's Mike Kraft with Bumblebee.
Hi,
Got
Mike.
a quick question for you. Catherine, thanks for the presentation. Really, really valuable and useful and great work you guys are doing. A quick question on kind of your process with respect to, I guess it would be a combination of tier 3 and 4. Obviously, it's not a certification scheme, so there's not a unit of assessment per se, but there's probably a targeted number of vessels and or fleets that could be under single or multiple owners. I'm assuming you don't do 100% audits of actual vessels on board. Is there a sampling or a relevant sampling component that you guys have found that is relevant to be able to kind of portray the right learnings or the coverage of that fleet and representative? Not sure if that makes sense, but thanks in advance.
Yes, hi Mike, nice to reconnect. It definitely makes sense, and yes, of course, there's a sampling approach. What we endeavour to do is to build sufficient relationship with the fleet owner and company to be able to ideally get access to the better vessels and the less good vessels for an efficient assessment of risk throughout the fleet, to then program which vessels are visited and why. However, of course, we completely respect that the company needs to guide the culture change, the evolution, the maturity and awareness inside the company itself, on board the vessels itself. So it may choose to pick a particular couple of skippers and work with those vessels first. So yes, I mean, to start with, you've got to get on a couple of the boats in the first 2 boats in the first visit, and then over the annual surveillance to get on subsequently more vessels. But agreeing the percentage and the coverage is a key part of designing that process with the client at the outset. And we don't have an idea of the range of that number yet. We haven't done enough vessels.
Thanks.
We have a question on the chat, Catherine. It would be great to hear more about how you approach worker voice and measure improvements in this area.
It would indeed. And the question is whether my colleague Marcelo is on the call. He mentioned he might be able to be, but it looks like he's not. Tom, I'm going to have to take that one on notice and get back to you, diving into the various criteria for more detail. However, what I can say is that Austral provided Wi-Fi in the interim as well. I could add that to that list of bullet points. And Tony's very keen to develop an app kind of facility where there's an independent approach for workers to be able to message somebody outside the company and provide that independent communication channel. So I apologize, not being down in the technical weeds on each of the criteria. I can't elaborate the sub-criteria, but I'm happy to take that on notice and follow that one up.
Great, thank you. Claire, if you have any sort of more specific questions, if you want to ping them into me in an email, I can send them to Catherine so she can include when she speaks to her colleague, if that's helpful.
Thanks, great.
Catherine, it's Lucy Blow from New England Seafood.
Hi.
Hi there, I really enjoyed that presentation. Thank you very much. And I'm very interested to see and hear what you're doing. My kind of point really, I'm trying to think it through because there's a lot of information that you've given us, but it kind of links in, I think, to the question that Mike Kraft asked earlier on. I just wonder, I suspect one of the challenges to spreading this as far as one might want is to access some of the vessels directly once, is to gain the access to vessels. I appreciate that you've proven that, you've done pilots already. I'm wondering whether in your training materials, your communication materials, there would be a significant focus on trying to build those relationships to get onto the vessels, because I suspect that unless a company is a vessel operator itself, that there will be barriers to climb.
Yes, and I mean, from the thank you, Lucy. From the supply chain retail perspective, you know, it's about where the rubber hits the road, where the hull hits the water, and where the people's feet hit the deck. That you really want to look under the hood and find out what's going on. And fundamentally, this is why we have a capability building, empowerment, management system implementation philosophy. We say kaupapa in New Zealand from a Māori perspective of, you know, industry needs to know how far to pull up its socks privately before any kind of public scrutiny. And you know, being down in the weeds for the last 7 years working in seafood business based from New Zealand, it's so much about language. It's so much about, you know, incremental drip feed of understanding and not frightening the horses to gain that confidence and that trust. So, you know, although Austral's gone public with their report, it's taken them a year to get their ducks in a row since the end of that report to be confident and comfortable to put it up there. And that's a lot of internal communicating. We looked at some of that communication material, and we've already been asked by PNG FIA to help them with some of their communication material. But we don't yet have a vast product package of our own resource sheets and fact sheets and documents, etc. We are a startup and we are building this on the smell of an oily rag as we win contracts and transfer any of the small revenue out of that into investing in building materials. So yes, it's a sensitive thing, and I mean, gosh, sitting next to Tony for 7 years and hearing him talk to the seafood industry and learning from that, you know, it's got to be done sensitively. It's got to be done in increments, and by golly, you've got to deliver on the things that you say you're going to do when you're at that end of things. I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you. And I respect that you've got to build yourselves to be able to build the communication materials. One further suggestion is that I expect some of those in translation into different languages would be helpful at the end of the day. Thanks. Yes,
very good point. Thank you. As you would have noticed from the team, you know, it's a multicultural team. We have a range of language capabilities. And we are associated with a thing called Fish for All, a recreational fishing app, which is in 6 key languages in cultural terms in New Zealand. So we do have a commitment to that. And this is actually the medium term aspiration in our model, is that we end up building capability, training, delivering those ISO 19011 and SA 8000 programs with local audit capabilities, so that the local languages are there. But clearly there has to be, what's the word, a little bit of objective management of that, because once you get into local relationships, there's also obviously the risk of corruption. And we have to be, there has to be the oversight for that.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions on the chat, and I noticed that Marcelo has just joined us. So maybe we could come back to that question in a moment, if that's okay, Catherine.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Tom. Marcelo, while you prepare your reflections, I'll just let you know we had a question in relation to worker voice and how to measure improvements in this area, which I fudged. So I'll let you answer that in a minute. Thank you for joining. And now Mike Kraft has asked a question about our crew interviews, a component of the vessel audits. Absolutely, Mike. Any good verification system, you know, requires the objective evidence, the personnel perspectives, and one's own observation as an assessor, as an auditor. And so in both Austral and Mauritius, for Austral and Mauritius and PNG, Frabel, crew were interviewed in a systematic way, and we also all underwent training on that in the 2 training programs. Marcelo has extensive experience of this, and that's written into the framework. So again, Marcelo might like to add to that, and also kindly comment on worker voice.
Hi, good afternoon. I am in another thing.
So would you like to comment, Marcelo, on how worker voice is reflected in the benchmark assessment process?
Yes, worker voice was included in 2016. I think few organizations were working on that, but helping Australia in 2016, we developed one criteria with several indicators and several requirements for working voice, giving access to crew on board to have direct contact with families anytime. So the fishing vessel, unbelievable, invested on Wi-Fi on board, the direct communication channels on board with captains, and also they show us some meetings with the fishing company manager. So, and then based on this experience, we include several indicators. I think there's 5 requirements to assess that worker voice. They are included in this fisheries assessment for social aspects.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Marcelo.
2 questions that have come through on the chat. Firstly, an excellent initiative. Can you explain a bit more about not being an audit when there is a very strong element of assessment in the concept?
Yeah, so we're very determined, and our backgrounds show we are not a group of auditors. This is not an audit company. Although Marcelo especially has audit capability, and Peter has audit capability from chain of custody, especially with MSC and ASC, but now building that in this space as well. So audit can, there's many benefits of an audit approach, but there's also many failings and risks from a human empowerment point of view. And fundamentally, this is a human empowerment approach. And so we very much take that at the outset, which is where the word assessment is more descriptive and friendly, and shows that there's the gap assessment in the first part of the benchmark tool, and then the follow-up, so that you get that spider diagram of how far an entity has come. But we recognize that some entities just want the most efficient check, and then to go off to independent third-party auditors for their B2C consumer-facing labels, etc., that they might have or they might be seeking. So we can audit, but the emphasis is not on audit. I hope that answers your question.
Great. Thank you very much, Catherine. Another question. Did OSA collaborate with the Seafood Task Force? And if so, how much overlap is there with the Seafood Task Force Code of Conduct? Yeah, look, there's extensive collaboration in how the criteria have gone into the framework tool. And I take my hat off to my colleague Marcelo, who has been a part of the drive in this space, and is currently co-chair of the Seafood Task Force, and was involved in it from early days. He can perhaps elaborate here. We have not collaborated with any group to say we're setting up OSA and sort the design. That's happened and sought to get them to help us design it. That's happened within the 7 of us who are on that early slide. We are very respectful of the entire ecosystem, and the sustainable seafood backgrounds of a number of us will show that we recognize the value of every player in that system to drive change. And we are now going around and having conversations with those groups that proactively want this kind of engagement and discussion to figure out how each other's programs can feed into one another. So yes, the Seafood Task Force criteria are part of the benchmark tool assessment approach. So a company could go through it and come out and go, cool, we've met that one. Marcelo, would you like to add there at all?
No, it was clearly.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Well, that's all the questions on the chat function so far. So if anyone's got any other questions, please feel free to take the opportunity.
Hello, Tom. Thank you. This is Christine Barron from the Pew Charitable Trusts. Hello, Catherine. Hello, Marcelo. I just wanted to introduce myself, as we've had email, but we're hoping to virtually meet in Boston, at least with Marcelo. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to learn about your work. So I want to thank you for this presentation, the transparency, your forthcoming introduction, and also the sensitive approach to your work. And I just had a question with respect to the US NFI Fish Crew B2B. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about that, how that came about, what the role is, and if it's replicable.
Thank you, Christine. It's a delight to connect, and I hope to do so more in future. Not really, only what I've heard through the wind. As I mentioned, David Carter is a board member, and also actually Greg Johansson, based in New Zealand, is a board member. I understand it's very much vessel based, and is aiming to empower and support industry. I was seeking some public information yesterday and there isn't any yet. And I also understand that it's not too far away from announcements and launch and more information being available. So look, any, to my mind and my background in World Wildlife Fund, any effort where the industry takes to empower itself and get organized is a good one. As long as there is access to material and documentation from a transparency and scrutiny point of view. And if their members want to, for example, go through a process like OSA offers, that they're not dissuaded from doing so. And it actually would be a very smart, strategic approach if some deliberate pilots and some deliberate tests of each other's systems were facilitated, so that we can, you know, a rising tide floats all boats, raises all boats. We can support each other, mutually reinforce each other, and actually show that complementary ecosystem of what entities do cover and what they don't cover.
Great, I'll look forward to learning more, and I'll reach out.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Any final questions? No. Okay, well, if you do have any thoughts, you can let us know afterwards. So thank you very much for joining our webinar, and a special thank you to Catherine for presenting, particularly for the time. If you do, like I say, if you have any feedback or questions you'd rather ask offline, please do not hesitate to email me. I will contact Catherine and share any results or any answers back with you. The next webinar takes place on Monday, the 11th of March at 4 p.m. UK time on harvest strategies, and it will be presented by Shana Miller from Pew. So a final big thank you to everyone for joining us. A big thank you to Catherine for presenting as well. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you everyone for the engaging conversation, and enjoy the rest of your days. Look forward to being in touch.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.